So, as I was saying, without further ado, I'll hand over to Rene. So, Rene, if you share your screen now, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, sharing it. So can you just confirm that you can see it?
I can see it perfectly. I can see the slide deck.
Okay, excellent. Then let's get started with our webinar on hybrid SharePoint 2013 and Office 365 environments. So a quick bit of information about the format today, sort of. So the first 45 minutes approximately, I'll do the presentation. If at any point of time you have any questions, just write them down, write them in the chat box, or write them down for yourself and ask them afterwards. And once I'm done with the presentations, then I'll stay around and answer all of them. So even if it goes beyond 3 p.m., I'll stick around and answer any other question that you may have then concerning any of the presentation content. About myself, so my name is Rene Modery. I'm originally from Germany. I've been now here in Singapore, where I still am right now, for more than 6 years. I was involved in 2 major regional SharePoint implementations here, so both of them spanned across Asia Pacific. I've had the opportunity to learn a lot during this time as I was involved in all kinds of ways. So I was mostly doing, you could say, requirements gathering and then solution implementation, but also did a bit of training, sometimes a bit of administration, a bit of development, and all kinds of other things done during that time. I'll be moving to Switzerland next week, or basically to Europe next week, and start working in Switzerland on 1st of June, where I'll focus then mostly really on Office 365 during my work. I'll be working for First Quad in Zurich. I'm also a Office 365 MVP now in my 2nd year here for Microsoft. So let's get started with the actual content. So first of all, let's have a look at hybrids in general and specifically hybrids in our context. So when I'm talking about a hybrid environment in this presentation now, what I then actually mean is that a company would have at one side, they would have a SharePoint 2013 environment, SharePoint 2013 environment. This is internal, so I'll explain it later again at some point, but when I say internal here, it doesn't have to mean that it's internally hosted. It could also be internally hosted, but generally the idea is this environment is within their network. On the other side, of course, what they also have is an Office 365 environment, and not just having it there alongside with the internal SharePoint 2013 environment, but of course also connected in some way. So there may be some data flow from 2013 to Office 365 and or the other way around. So far so good. That's fairly simple to understand. Now, why do we actually need such a hybrid environment? What do companies usually do with it? What are the reasons why they implement it? Generally, I mean, there are lots of reasons why you may migrate to the cloud or move to the cloud. And having a hybrid environment usually also goes along with some of those major reasons. So one of the reasons is usually to reduce costs. So while you may think, hey, you add an extra environment and you want to reduce costs, don't you actually increase it? So depending on how you implement it, of course, the overall goal may be to reduce costs by, for example, migrating completely from SharePoint 2013 to Office 365. And as this may take some time, you may have a hybrid to have both systems concurrently for a specific period of time, so that you have enough time to migrate all that content. If you've got a lot of content, you can't just migrate it overnight, but it may happen over the span of a few weeks or months. So during such a period of time, then this is where you would then, for example, set up a hybrid. Another thing, of course, is that you may want to leverage additional functionality. So having a separate environment like Office 365 may provide you with additional functionality that you don't really have on premises. Like, let's say you may want to invite externals to the environment, but you don't want to open up your firewall or so, or you would want to give externals VPN access to your internal environment. So having Office 365, for example, as a extranet may give you that additional functionality that you can't provide in-house. Or, of course, the other way around, where you say, hey, you have Office 365, but there are certain bits and pieces that you actually need, like, let's say, a lot of the business intelligence capabilities, which are not available in Office 365. You could also set up a simple environment just to expand on basically your existing Office 365 environment. A third reason is also a separation of workloads. So you may say, for example, that you don't have the capabilities to really provision project sites very quickly in-house. It just takes a short while to do all the provisioning. Whereas if you have Office 365, you may say, hey, it's a lot easier to quickly provision a new site collection there for a new project. It may just take a few weeks or maybe a few months even, but really for a specified period of time only. So you have on your on-premises environment all your regular sites, you could say, your team sites, or specifically other content sites. And on Office 365, you then have all the short-lived sites, so those sites that only live for, like I said, for example, a few weeks or maybe even a few months then. And naturally, last reason is you have an increased flexibility and scalability. So with Office 365, it doesn't matter if you have 1 user, 50 users, or 5,000 users. So it's fairly easy to really add additional sites or content into Office 365 without having to look at all the additional hardware requirements or anything like that. And you also have a reduced workload for your internal IT team. They don't have to administrate a server or as complex server setup if you use Office 365. So that may again be one reason then why you actually then want a hybrid, even if it may be also for, like I said, for a short period of time only. Okay, so that's about it for setting the basics. So let's have a look at planning and governance. So in my point of view, setting up a hybrid is not so much about the technology, but really more about the people, the processes, and the governance behind it. So if you think about it, setting up a hybrid may be, you got your SharePoint 2013 environment, you purchase Office 365, and then you just connect it. But the technical bits are, in my opinion, really fairly easy. So it's more difficult to really define a lot of other things really in the background. Like I said, for example, this governance here. I'm going to look now at some of those things here that you should consider when you plan for a hybrid. So that's not an extensive list that contains everything that you should need to plan for when you want to do a hybrid environment, but really just a few points that, in my opinion, are quite important and that you should really have a look at. There may be then a few others that may come about. Chances are, if you have a SharePoint 2013 environment on premises or so, you already thought about some of the governance stuff anyway, and if you just expand that into the cloud, then you're already much closer to really having a proper planning for that hybrid environment. So let's say one thing, you've got two environments. The first question is, if you've got, let's say, a document, where do you have to put it? Do you put it onto your existing internal SharePoint 2013 server, or do you put it on Office 365? How do you differentiate between those two? How do you know what goes actually then where? So you've got different possibilities in terms of deciding where do you actually want to put something. You can say, depending on user type, content goes to one of the two environments. So that you say, for example, if you're a member of the finance team, the finance documents are a bit more, there's a bit more governance required, or there's maybe some compliance reasons, or that should still be kept in-house, or keep it on your SharePoint 2013 environment. But if it's, let's say, a member of the sales team, sales documents are nothing where we need to be too worried about compliance. That's where it just goes to Office 365. So that's one way to decide really, depending what kind of user accesses your environment, that user should go to a specific environment, or I don't want to call it environment, but should either go to SharePoint 2013 or to Office 365. A second option is again a bit similar, organization. Also goes in that way. So I think I mixed it up a bit. I just realized. Okay, what I just said was actually meant for organization here in terms of if you're a member of sales or of finance. For user type, it could be, for example, like I mentioned, internal and external. So an internal user should always go to 2013. If it's a document that is related to internal people only, it should go to 2013. If it's a document that is meant for, let's say, sharing with externals, where you may want to put it on Office 365 as part of your extranet. My apologies about mixing that up. Third way of partitioning it is separating by workload. So again, let's say you've got, for example, documents that rely a lot on business intelligence, which is not available in Office 365 or not properly. So that, for example, if it's related to something like that, should really go onto your on-premises environment. If it's a generic document, then it's more likely that it will also be possible to put it on Office 365, and that's where it would go. Or that you say, for example, certain, like I said, certain types of content should go to one environment. Let's say project-related documents always go to Office 365. Where you have your project sites, whereas if you've got other, let's say, standards or other content, that would go to your SharePoint 2013 environment. And lastly, I mean, one way could also be just to partition by date, where you say, hey, we're on the way to migrating to Office 365, so starting from 1st of June, all new content goes onto Office 365, all existing content is still on SharePoint 2013 and will be slowly migrated. So it really means that SharePoint 2013 should not be sort of updated with any new content. And if you've got a new document, put it on Office 365. So those are a few ways how you can think of defining which kind of content should go to which of the two platforms. As I just mentioned, you may have a plan on migrating completely to Office 365, or maybe even just partially to Office 365. So what you should definitely do then is create a content migration plan, or generally a migration plan. And you should decide when and what to migrate. So when you look at what to migrate, there are basically three different pillars on what you should really have a look at. The first big one is naturally content. So that is depending on your content size, but really most of the time it's a gradual migration. So that can be really a lot of content, several gigabytes or so, that you may slowly move to Office 365, depending on, of course, your bandwidth that's available, but also depending on when, for example, the owner of that content may give it's okay that it can be safely migrated from in-house to the cloud. So how do you actually do that then? So you should really have a look at the best way to migrate. So you could say, for example, you migrate first by, depending on how you've got it set up in your environment, or for example, depending on department. So, for example, towards the end of the financial year, it's not a good idea to try to involve the finance team into a big migration project. They're just too busy doing something. Or if you've got a big conference coming up, maybe your marketing and communications team is just too busy preparing for that, so they may not be available. So really look at the availability of the business owners and then plan accordingly on when they are available, when they can do, or when they can support you in your migration. The other thing is, of course, depending on location. So that's really, you just look at all the different sites you have in your SharePoint environment or site collections, and just say, okay, our one site collection will migrate by 1st of June, a second site collection a week later, and so on and so on. so that you really look at the SharePoint specific content and the individual locations there and then migrate it. Or last thing, of course, is that you say you migrate it depending on the type of content. So if you have a lot of simple content, you could say, let's say just your regular Word documents, your PowerPoint presentations, you may say, okay, we first migrate everything that's really fairly easy to copy over, where we know, oh, they are regularly used, basically where people collaborate on a lot. So we start with that first, where we keep the sort of the big content that is touched seldomly, and not too often. We keep it on premises first and migrate it at a later stage. One other piece of advice here for content migration is, you've seen it in the intro, for example, Modery offers a tool that can help you with it. In my opinion, it's always a good thing to include planning for some external help when you do some kind of work like that. So getting a tool that can support you during the migration can really ease your work a lot. To give another analogy, I'm moving to Switzerland, like I said, or to Europe next week. So today we had all the movers coming into our house, packed all the stuff, etc. So while I could have packed it myself all into the boxes, etc., it would have just taken me weeks to organize it like that, pack it nicely, etc. And just getting the right kind of help actually really reduced that workload a lot. And instead of me having to do it and plan it and pack it, etc., the movers really did it within a day. So if you get the external help for migrating your content to SharePoint, you know that tool does exactly that kind of job. It's programmed for that. It knows what kind of things to look out for, and that tool, like I said, really can simplify it a lot. Now, what else do we need to consider when we migrate? So one thing is, or the second thing are solutions. If you're migrating, you're usually not only migrating content, but also you have several solutions within your SharePoint environment, your on-premises environment, whether they're now custom-coded solutions that were done in .NET and that you may need to look at, or whether it's just some simple solutions. Let's say you created a workflow in SharePoint Designer or in Visio. So all that kind of stuff you really need to look at. What is in your on-premises environment? Do you need to migrate it? And if you need to migrate it, is it even possible? So you may also need to check farm load solutions, as we know, don't work in Office 365. So if you have any of those, you need to check if you can convert them to sandbox solutions. Once you've got an overview of what can be migrated or what you have to migrate, then verify that it does work in the cloud, and also test it, of course. So don't just migrate it and hand it over back to the business users and think, okay, everything should be fine. So Office 365, while it is basically good enough to work with most kind of solutions, still it's a bit different from on-premises systems. So if you've got a very resource-intensive application or so, it may not work properly in the cloud. So make sure that you test all kinds of solutions that you have on-premises and that should be migrated. Test them in the cloud. And the last kind of thing, of course, that you may need to look at during the migration plan is services. So for example, the main thing here is, for example, search. If you've got only one environment, you've got one search engine that indexes everything, that provides results for that content. But if you suddenly have got two different environments running, your on-premises SharePoint and Office 365, that means suddenly, do you have now two different search engines running? And when people want to search something, where do they go, etc.? How can they find content from both environments? All that kind of stuff you also need to plan for then. So those kind of services then really have a look at them as well and define what should be used where at what point of time. Okay, so once the migration planning has been done, you also need to figure out who gets actually access to what. As we know, you can't just assign, or you could assign 5,000 people in your company licenses to Office 365. But if not all of them actually use Office 365, you may be wasting money by assigning them licenses even though they may not need them. So really need to decide, should somebody have permanent access to Office 365 or should it be on-demand access? So permanent access naturally is if you know, hey, those people need to access Office 365 anyway all the time, as we're migrating to it permanently. And yeah, it will be our #1 platform, so everybody should have access. Whereas on-demand access then really means, like I said, you may have, for example, project sites or site collections, and people should only have access to Office 365 if they're still part of some projects that are moved to the cloud. If somebody has a license for Office 365 assigned to them and they don't access Office 365 because there's absolutely no need for them, that's when you're wasting money. So that's when you then, of course, should plan. The goal for it is really to plan for it properly and to put in some good processes like approval processes and verification processes so that you have some effective license management. That's still a bit tricky to manage, so what you may need is you may need to either verify it regularly via, for example, running specific PowerShell scripts or so, just to check who are the users who actually still use Office 365 and do they have licenses, or who are the users who have licenses assigned and don't use Office 365. So that's still something that may require some extra work, of course, from the internal side. My new company, for example, developed a tool just recently for a bigger German company that we were working with for that kind of purpose, where that company actually then really wants to verify that all the licenses it has assigned to people are assigned to only those people that really still use Office 365. So if you have a lot of on-demand access, then watch out for that, and if you do it properly, you can save even more than, of course, than having than just buying a specific amount of licenses. Okay, so that's part of the planning process for setting up a hybrid or preparing for a hybrid. Now, how do we set it up then actually in that hybrid environment? So after we purchased Office 365 licenses, and after we set up our SharePoint 2013 environment, if we haven't done so already, what do we need to do to get the two of them talk to each other and to be really connected to each other? So while talking about how to actually do that would be a long session or so, I'm going to keep it actually at a very high level and will point you to the right resources at the end of this presentation so that you can actually then have a look at it for yourselves if you're interested in really setting it up. Now, before we continue, what is actually possible when you want to connect the two environments? So this is now some information directly from Microsoft that was first presented at the SharePoint conference in Las Vegas last year. So the three big items that work out of the box are search, business connectivity services, and do it online. So search, naturally, you may want to really, I'll talk about this specifically, but this is the one big thing that you should definitely be planning for. How do you search your two environments? How do you define where you can see the results from both environments, etc. Business connectivity services, so you may want to consider, for example, providing some line of business information from your on-premises environment, so let's say from your SQL server or from any other business system that you have on-premises. You may want to surface that kind of information in Office 365, so PCS may help you here. And do it online is very specific, so that's when you have SAP running. That may then help you to really connect the two systems to each other. Any other services, as you see, it is partially possible for Exchange. It is possible for links, so basically that means that presence information is shared, but any other SharePoint services, it doesn't work out of the box. So the main focus generally for setting up the hybrid would be, if you want to really connect it, would be for search, BCS, and do it online. Now, setting up a hybrid, for that Microsoft says there are actually 3 phases that you need to execute. First phase would be to set up your hybrid infrastructure, so that's setting up the environments, if you haven't done so already, and starting to connect them to each other. Second step is set up the identity management. So naturally, to set up a proper hybrid, as companies use usually Active Directory for their identity management, it's preferred that you actually also use AD to authenticate against Office 365, so that you have a single sign-on capability via ADFS. That's where you set up that hybrid IDM. I'll talk about that again in a bit more detail in a minute. And lastly, then of course, once you set up all the infrastructure and identity management, you want to set up your search, BCS, and or do it online so that those systems then are connected as well. If you want to do anything, then there are a few things that you need to have installed. So simply said, PowerShell is your best friend when you set up your hybrid, just to get the 2 systems, SharePoint and Office 365, just to get the 2 of them to trust each other, etc., to know about each other. You do a lot of you run a lot of PowerShell commandlets, so you need to install the Microsoft Online commandlets for Office 365, and you also need the single sign-on system for Office 365. So those are the 2 essential tools that you need. Once you've got those 2 installed, you're good to go basically, and basically setting up the connectivity, so the setting up the trust between SharePoint and Office 365 isn't really just a matter of running a whole range of PowerShell commandlets. And don't worry, I'm not going to show you a lot of screens with PowerShell commandlets. That's all in the Microsoft documentation, and it's quite boring, so we're going to talk about the high level only. First thing, if you don't have your own domain, you should stop here right now. You need your own domain really to verify a lot of things and to do a lot of things. The most important thing is actually for setting up directory synchronization. You need to provide a proper UPN, a user profile name, for all your users. So if you don't have a your own domain, you will run into some trouble here. We'll see that again in a minute. But you also need your own domain for a lot of other things like DNS, certificates, reverse proxy, etc. So you need to really have your own publicly accessible domain, like you know, the popular contoso.com. So most companies have that anyway. If you don't have it yet, then yeah, I would even say you might be a fairly new company. That's really, like I said, really key. Make sure you've got your own domain, you've got access to the DNS settings for it, etc., to verify it for Office 365, and so on. So you should be able to verify that you are the actual owner of that domain. I also mentioned setting up a reverse proxy just now. What a reverse proxy actually does, it's in a fairly specific use case needed only, but and it's not needed for every hybrid, but it's very useful in the end. So you've got 2 options basically, or yeah, 2 options when you want to set up a hybrid. One option would be to say that your SharePoint environment accesses data from Office 365. So in that case, your in-house network basically sends requests to Office 365 and receives them back. So basically a fetch request here from your in-house environment. That's working without any additional proxy support, of course. Now, if you want to do the other way around, so that Office 365 has access to, for example, line of business information from your on-premises environment via the on-premises BCS, that's when you need that reverse proxy. So you wouldn't want to give Office 365 direct access to your on-premises environment, because that would mean that everybody else could also theoretically then directly access your environment, so you don't open up a lot of ports or so. But what you do is you put a reverse proxy in your DMZ, make it publicly accessible, and yeah, it's really just port 443 that's then open, and what happens is any incoming requests from Office 365 go to that reverse proxy. That reverse proxy then forwards it to your on-premises environment. The on-premises environment responds to the reverse proxy, and the reverse proxy then sends it back to the cloud. So that's then really, you could say, for security reasons, that you use that reverse proxy in between SharePoint and Office 365. Like I said, it's only needed if Office 365 consumes on-premise data. If you don't plan to do it that way, so if you don't plan to use BCS, for example, from Office 365 accessing on-premise, then you don't need to set that up. The other thing where it may be needed is for, no, let's skip that. Okay, so next step, identity management planning. Like I mentioned before, you need to have your own domain to verify that, or to provide the proper UPN for your users. If you've got a domain that ends in .local, because you used it in your AD for your users, that's not going to work. So you really need something that's publicly accessible. So Contoso.com, Microsoft.com, etc. You also should have your users in a single forest. There are some ways, as far as I remember, to get a multi-forest domain working, but it's getting really quite tricky. So if you've got a single forest, that's perfect. If you've got a more complex Active Directory setup, it may be a good point of time to really talk to Microsoft on how to do that, because, like I said, it gets quite tricky. So it may work or it may not work. Okay, so let's say we've now got our infrastructure set up, we verified our domain with Office 365. We want to synchronize our users now with Office 365. So for that purpose, we used a tool called DearSync. So users who log into Office 365, you wouldn't want to provide a different kind of logon for the users, that they don't have to remember how to log on to my local machine and how to log into Office 365, but rather really one single logon is enough. Or one username in that case still is enough. That's what you use DearSync. You basically install it on a machine in your environment. That machine can't be a domain controller, but can be anything else. So even a fairly simple 512 megabytes mini installation of Server Social is enough actually to run that tool. You install it, you provide the, you need to activate it in Office 365 via the UID synchronization, and then you run it. And what happens is your on-premises users then just get synchronized to the cloud as well, so that Office 365 is then aware of all the users in your Active Directory that you have available. One thing or two things to note. One, it doesn't synchronize passwords. So if you just use DearSync to synchronize users, but you don't set up any ADFS, which we'll see in a minute, that would mean users would still have to be assigned a password in Office 365. So the username would be the same, like Rene at Modery.net, for example. But yeah, the password I would have to remember to log onto my own machine here and to log onto Office 365. Those two passwords would be different. They wouldn't, of course, be synchronized. The second thing to remember here is then just assigning a user to Office 365 and creating that user doesn't mean that that user already has access to Office 365. For that, you still need to assign a license. That's naturally just to really make it cost efficient. So if you've got 5,000, 10,000 users or so, and you synchronize them all, then you wouldn't want to have licenses for all of them immediately. So that allows you to really plan ahead then in terms of whom you assign a license at which point of time. Now, here's how it would look like if you synchronize with Active Directory. At the top here we see the AD synchronization has been activated. I could deactivate it again if I wanted to, but up here it basically tells you yes, it's on. And down there you can see the list of users, and on the right hand side the status use synced with Active Directory, so that's where you know it's not a user that's created directly in Office 365, but rather a user that has been set up in Active Directory and then synchronized. And naturally the next step would be to go to the user and assign him a license so that he can then make use of the services. As I mentioned, DSync only doesn't provide you with a single sign-on experience, so you have to remember two different sets of credentials. If you want to really provide single sign-on that your user signs on with one set of credentials only, you need to use Active Directory Federation Services, or short ADFS. What that means, basically, you set up your ADFS servers. Microsoft against 2 servers plus 2 ADFS proxies. So the proxies again to allow communication from outside your network. If your users are not not in-house, for example, but rather traveling or from at home and such. 2 servers each is the usual recommendation, and if set up correctly, then what it means is, if you want to sign on to Office 365, your regular screen, if you start to type in your username here, Office 365 recognizes, oh, it's actually a federated domain here, and then instead of being able to type in your password, you are then actually sort of forwarded to the sign-in page to your own AD environment on your ADFS server proxy. So that then really means you really get to authenticate against your local AD, you could say, in the end, with the same password. So that's really the preferred way to do it for any hybrid. It's not a key requirement, I would say, but of course, naturally, if you've got a big enough user base, then it's definitely something you should look at. For 20 users, it may not make sense, but usually for 20 users, there are fairly few cases where they have 2 separate platforms running anyway. So for most hybrid environments, the user base is large enough to really justify having a separate ADFS setup so that they have a proper single sign-on. Okay, one other thing I forgot, actually, I wanted to move to earlier slide, but for SharePoint 2013, if you're wondering what can I use here, so actually it doesn't matter. You can use SharePoint Foundation, Standard, Enterprise, all is possible. So you are not restricted to any specific license here on premises. Of course, if you want to have the full set of functionalities, then Enterprise is the preferred version, but it really depends on your requirements, and all of them work with setting up that hybrid connection with Office 365. And the other thing, I mentioned it before, so it doesn't matter, whenever I say on-premise SharePoint or so, it doesn't actually have to be in-house. You may have your own data center running in-house, but maybe you've got another company running your data center externally, or maybe you're using a hosted SharePoint environment, for example, from FPWeb or Rackspace, or maybe you're even running SharePoint on, let's say, Azure or AWS. That's all possible. It doesn't matter where your SharePoint actually is, as long as you have control over it, of course, in the end. To give you an example, so when I set up my test hybrid environment, I actually ran it in Azure. So I set up my SharePoint 2013 VMs in Windows Azure and connected them then to Office 365 without any major issues. You've got the full control over it, and I can access, like I said, my SharePoint 2013 environment on Azure then without any issues from anywhere. So if you want to set up a simple test environment, that's actually a perfect thing to do, setting it up on Azure, or if you also want to AWS and just set up the servers there, and if you don't need them, just sort of power them down, etc. There's a lot of guidance regarding setting up SharePoint 2013 on Azure, actually, so Microsoft just also recently released a new documents around that. Setting up SharePoint on Azure is really extremely well documented. If you really want to set up your own hybrid, just give it a try. It's very cost efficient. like I said, you only pay for it if you need it. So what I did, if I didn't need my environments, I just powered them down. When I needed them, I powered them up. That took really, 2 minutes or so, and it was back up and running. Okay. Now for the past few minutes, setting up search, like I mentioned, is a critical thing. If you've got two environments, naturally you want to provide your users a simple way to find information in both of them without having to go to two different search centers or anything like that. So what you would usually do is you provide your one search page, basically, where people go to search, and you show results from both environments. So what you actually have to do is you have to configure a result source. You have to define its remote SharePoint. So in our case, we're just doing it. We are using a SharePoint 2013 on-premise enterprise search center, and we want to show you the basically the remote SharePoint search results from SharePoint Online. So what I do here is I create in SharePoint 2013 a new result source, define it as remote SharePoint, and define the service URL. So this is then actually Office 365 that you see here. Once that's done, you then define a query rule. Say that query should run at specific, under specific conditions. So like on any kind of search, for example. And the last step then is you configure your results pages. So you you actually have to add an additional web part here to your search results page. So it doesn't actually mean that you have a proper complete mixed search page here where the content of both environments is shown side by side or in line with each other. But rather, as you see here, for example, at the top you've got your Office 365 content. You see here you've got the hypo365.sharepoint.com content, etc. And at the bottom you see that's my on-premises environment where I have got my, like I said, on-premise content basically. On the top bar here, the search refiners, you see I've got everything: SharePoint Online, people, conversations, videos. So that SharePoint Online is actually a custom search page that I added here where I can say this should only show the SharePoint Online content. So that's the other thing. You may want to make it easy for people to really find your content that's on Office 365 via one specific search page. That's also possible. Again, that's actually all very well documented by Microsoft. So I'll provide the link at the end here, or if you just type in hybrid SharePoint 2013 Office 365 environments, you'll find the technical link on your first search results page. Okay, before I wrap it up, for search, one thing to note actually, which I haven't added here in the slides, but what happens is you can't have your search indexer here, for example, index both environments easily. So what you have is you've still got your search indexer running locally on SharePoint 2013, and of course that's the search indexer on Office 365 that does its own job. So what you do here is you don't provide basically one indexer that searches both environments, but what you can do rather instead, or what you do instead, is to provide the results from both environments together. So that's one key thing to note. You don't configure search to really index Office 365 online, but rather you trust the Office 365 search and just grab the results from that search page then. So coming back to wrapping it up, if you want to set up your own hybrid environment now, even just for testing, so like I said, there's a lot of good content available from Microsoft. How to set up your hybrid in general, then one-way setup where you've got, for example, only your on-premise environment accessing Office 365, or the two-way setup, the more complex one where you need your proxies. Also some guidance around that, BCS, search, do it online, it's all basically on TechNet. There's also then, of course, some white papers from other companies, Excel, Quest, etc. So there's a lot of content there. Sorry. And what I did is I started to gather links to all those resources on my own blog, and to give you a direct link to that page where I gather that resources. Sorry, my voice is slowly failing. I'm using the domain hybridoffice365.com, so if you visit that, you'll see basically a small page there where I start to list all the content. I'm going to add a bit more. For example, I'm planning to finally publish my blog post on how I set up my SharePoint 2013 on Azure and Office 365 hybrid environment, how I set it up. That's going to be there soon as well. And yeah, any other links that may be useful, I'll continuously add them to that page here so that there's always like a quite concise list of interesting content. Okay, good. So that's then the end of the webinar. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found some useful content. And if you've got any questions, then please ask them now. So,
okay. So
like I said.
Thank you very much, Rene. We do have some questions. Are you okay? Is the first one?
Yeah.
Okay. Because, I mean, bear in mind, guys, that it's 10 to 3 for Rene in the morning, so I think he's done awesome. So there's a few questions. If you don't cover it, your personal site is in Office 365. You can follow documents in SharePoint 2010 on-premise, question mark. Does the social aspects cross between Office 365 and on-prem as well?
Sorry, can you repeat that all again?
Yep.
I just couldn't hear it properly.
Your personal site is in Office 365. Can you follow documents in SharePoint 2013 on-premise? Does the social aspects cross between Office 365 and on-premise?
Okay, that's a very good question. Generally, I would say right now, no. I'm trying to remember how it was exactly, but I know that you have to be careful with my site, so that's actually also one big thing to plan for. Where do you keep your my site in the end, on-premise or in the cloud? I'm trying to remember how much connectivity there was between them, but I'm really tempted to say that there was no connectivity at all, so that worst case you end up with two different my sites or so. And with the social streams or so, basically the connectivity between those, I think there was also really no connection between them.
So as goes the my site, probably the best answer would be that when you set up your on-prem SharePoint 2013, don't activate the my site and let everyone use their my site externally would probably be the easiest, or other way around. You know, so that's probably the easiest answer.
So obviously there's still a lot that Microsoft can improve over time. So I think in SharePoint 2010, I mean, even at that point of time, then you could set up a hybrid, but it was not well documented and with even lesser functionality than right now. So Microsoft is improving things, but we're still far from having the perfect hybrid environment where all the services talk to each other and can be connected.
I agree, which leads very nicely on to the next question. Is not having business intelligence features available in 365, features such as reporting services and performance point services, a permanent unavailability, or is it going to be available in the future release of 365? I think I know the what you're going to say, but go for it.
Yeah, basically all I can say is that Microsoft is constantly improving the service, so yes, I think at some point of time we will have it. But if that's in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, or 18 months, I mean, that's anybody's guess right now. So there's no public information actually available yet on that. Right now I would say if you have a need for that, then don't wait for Microsoft, but rather really do it in-house with regular SharePoint 2013. So nothing is known so far actually on when that could be available.
Yeah. And Casey, who answered that question, also asked, if I have a setup of an on-prem environment so I can get the BI enterprise features, then why go hybrid at all? Is there a way to save costs via a hybrid versus 100% on-prem?
Yeah, it really depends then, of course, on the use case. So if you've got a really major requirements for BI, then there may be no need to go for hybrid at all, of course. It really depends on your needs and what you want to achieve in the end. So, it does not always make sense naturally. So if you use SharePoint 2013 in-house, perfectly fine. You've got a good team to support it. You don't have any issues, and you have the money to support it. Then, of course, just stay on premises. I would say, of course. I would really say the move to Office 365 is always justified by something else than by some other requirement, either reducing costs because you want to migrate there permanently, which means you don't need everything that's available on premises, or, like I mentioned, some other reasons. But in such a case where you've got this huge dependency on, for example, BI, and there may be no other reason actually to really set up that hybrid.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I've got a great one. I set up Office 365 trial version, and now is there any other setup required to use SharePoint 2013?
I'm not quite sure I understand that question exactly. So if you've got Office 365, the trial, and if you don't have SharePoint, you still need basically the licenses to run SharePoint 2013 if that's where it's going. So
I sort of read the question slightly differently. I think it's someone who's just literally starting out on 365, so they've set up a 365 version, and now is there any other setups required to use SharePoint 2013? And the answer to that is, well, no. If you have it set up, and if you've got even a, I don't know, myname.onmicrosoft.com, and your emails are going there, and you've got SharePoint 2013 with it, then you're good to go. There's an awful lot to learn with SharePoint, but you're good to go. Number one, if you host my site's on-premises, can you link to SkyDrive Pro hosted on Office 365?
Ooh. Again, I would say no. So there are a lot of things actually that I haven't tested in a long time. So I remember looking at that before, and I remember, like I said, the whole My Site thing was not really connected at all. So for that one, again, I would say right now, no, it's not working. So you might, actually now remember it, you end up with two different SkyDrive Pro. So if you've got on-premise and Office 365, then you have basically SharePoint, you've got SkyDrive Pro and SkyDrive Pro for Office 365, you could say.
Got a question about authentication. If I need to use the CAC HSPD12 PIV card authentication between my cloud and on-premise farms, any special concerns, any problems with two-form authentication? I've not used it, so.
Okay, I actually also never heard of it before, so sadly I can't give any answer here at all.
I'm terribly sorry about that, but we can't answer that question, neither of us. Can we set up hybrid? Sorry, it went down. Can we set up a hybrid setup with SharePoint 2010 or 2007 on-premise?
It was possible with SharePoint 2010 and the old version, so the Wave 14 of Office 365, but it was, like I said, it was not working as well as it is working right now. So if you've got generally an older SharePoint version right now on-premise and you want to run it with Office 365 in its current new Wave 15 version with the 2013 services, no, it's not possible. So both need to be really the 2013 versions. So you can't connect SharePoint 2007 or SharePoint 2010 to your current Office 365.
Okay. I got a great question next, but for this one, can you talk, another good question, can you talk at a high level on how we might end up exposing content, say a document library containing client data, from on-prem to Office 365? I'm just rereading that again.
Can you repeat the question again?
Yeah. Can you talk at a high level on how we might end up exposing content, say a document library containing client data from on-prem to Office 365? I think they're saying if you've got a document library in your SharePoint server in-house, they want to expose that or expose the data externally.
Yeah. So assume it's like you've got your library that you manage in-house, but you want to then synchronize it, for example, with Office 365. So
I believe that's where we're going, yeah.
On-premises. And it then gets synchronized to Office 365, where external clients can then, for example, access it from there.
Yes. The person's answered, yes, that's it. So thank you.
Okay, so that's not, I can't think of any proper, nice way to do that out of the box. So you would either have to do some custom development or use a third-party tool to do that actually. So really high level, let me just think about it for a second, but on a very high level, you would really need to, like I said, introduce that synchronization between the on-premises environment and Office 365. And I would really say the best guess is to check what kind of synchronization tools are out there, like that really allow you to synchronize content from SharePoint to SharePoint Online automatically. Other than that, yeah, the only other way would be really to do a lot of custom coding to achieve the same kind of functionality. So that might be then, of course, be very specific to your needs. But other than that, trying to do it out of the box, so I can't think of any way to achieve that otherwise. Okay, any other questions?
Can you sorry, Rene. Can you link your on-premise SharePoint to Office web apps on Office 365? I think the answer is no.
Yeah, I was just trying to think of a way to do it, but no, actually again no. So that falls again in those, if you remember correctly, that slide I had with what's possible and what isn't possible in SharePoint, other services, it just said no. So once again, actually no, can't be done.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I believe my only limit is to go in full Office 365 SharePoint, is we are currently using a third party to allow large files over 250 meg with RBS. Do you believe Office 365 limit of 250 meg will be solved at some point? Oh, and thank you for your time today. Thank you, Joe, for thanking us.
Not in the near future. I don't think Microsoft will increase that file size limit anytime soon. So I think it will only be increased as there's more, yeah, basically in, let's say, 2-3 years or so. I don't expect any major changes to that limit in the next few months or anything like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay, so basically we have no other questions, so I'll just switch over for the final slide and show my screen. So just really quick, because I'm guessing Rene would like to go to bed. Thank you very much, Rene. That was absolutely fantastic presentation. As I said, for Rene, it's now fast approaching 3 in the morning. So, great job. The next time maybe you'll be in Switzerland or Germany. We could do it. It may be easier. But very quickly, the next webinar is May 21st, and that's What's Your Social IQ? Succeeding with SharePoint Social. And that's with Sadie Van Buren and Chris McNulty. And that's at the usual time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. British Summer Time. And as I say, thank you very much, Rene. I do hope your move is successful. I'm sure it will be. And we'll see you again soon. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you from me as well.
And thanks everyone for turning up. Thank you. Talk to you soon.